Hi, I'm Dale Sherbeck, and welcome to the HQ, a CHA Learning and Healthcare Can podcast serial where we dive into healthcare issues and topics from the perspective of its people and discuss them with those that are leading in the health system. Together, we'll try to unpack these topics and learn what actions are being taken to innovatively solve them today. Over the course of almost 2 complete seasons on the HQ, we have talked with so many leaders across numerous organizations. But as we hold very true here at CHA Learning, leaders exist all levels, and many of whom don't have official titles or roles. Indeed, there are leaders around all of you who work at the front lines and bedside in healthcare, including those in parts of the health continuum which don't get as much attention, like hospice care. What will make this conversation unique is that it is about the remarkable gifts captured in the hardest, sometimes saddest, and sometimes scariest moments in our life experience, and specifically in those last moments of life. It is a time in our life cycle that seems so diametrically opposed to the curative practices we most commonly associate with healthcare, and, as such, which many healthcare workers themselves find difficult. But what you're going to hear today is that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be seen as an opposing moment. So welcome all to a conversation which I might distill as one that is actually about creating joy and laughter in healthcare, something many really need right now. I had the profound pleasure to hear today's guest at a conference earlier this spring. I found her story inspiring, as I hope you will as well. And given how much we have discussed the challenges and heightened stressors in healthcare, especially the last several years, I thought an uplifting conversation that reframes may be helpful for many. Perhaps a chance to reconnect our listeners with the passion that drew them into healthcare in their first place. So, with that, let me introduce you to today's guest, Zofia Dove. Zofia has over 30 years of international experience in healthcare systems, specifically in geriatric and palliative care. During this time, she has touched the lives of thousands of people in a profound way. She has brought joy and laughter to many patients at the most critical time of their lives. Zofia's deep understanding of the human condition, as it is related to aging, death, and dying, makes her an unexpected gift to everyone she is in contact with. Zofia is the best-selling author of Unexpected Gifts, a book inspired by interactions and experience with her clients. Her passion is to teach more effective communication skills, especially for those caring for the clients in transition. As I'm hoping you will shortly experience yourselves, she is an inspiring, empowering, and entertaining speaker who brings more light, love, and laughter to some very serious topics. And indeed, she will openly share her passion on the power of humor in communication. She brings this new perspective to institutional leadership, business and healthcare professionals, teams, and caregivers through her talks and training programs. So hi, Zofia, and welcome to the HQ.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I am intrigued and eager to share about my practices.
Thanks, Zofia. Yes, thank you for joining me today. Have this conversation that is, I'm sure, going to get people thinking and talking and feeling. So maybe while I provided our listeners with your very high level introduction, I've heard you tell your story before about your own journey. So I thought maybe we could start there and talk about, your life from Poland to where you are today, and how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Natural progression, I would say. When I look back at being a young teenager woman, I always been interested in psychology, but that understanding came to me recently. Actually, as a teenager, I was seeking a career which would be suitable to that who I was, and that would be someone who was active, physically involved in sports, full of energy, and there was element of being intrigued by other human beings and wanting to help. So I end up taking a course at the biggest rehabilitation center of my country, Poland, where I was born. That course was probably 9 months. It was done by clinicians, people who had hands-on and worked with patients. So a lot of literally being exposed to the patients. And that course was to give me rights to work in that center as rehab assistant. But I realized in the course of taking this practice that I am really passionate about it. So I end up taking steps and end up becoming a physiotherapist in Poland. But as life has it, I was very highly rewarded by my career in terms of satisfaction and fulfillment, and also the feedback from my patients. But life has it that in no time, I found myself being on the opposite side of the globe, almost in Canada, and not being able to speak English, not a word of English. And yet there was a passion in me, and I kept telling everybody I want to work in a hospital. And life arranged it in a interesting way that in a year and a half, I worked in one of the biggest hospitals. I worked in one of the biggest hospitals in Winnipeg, St. Boniface Hospital. And hardly speaking the language, you can imagine I was here just 1 year and a half. I found myself working on psychiatric units twice a week. That was absolutely out of this world experience, because I hardly understood what people were saying with the logical language, never mind not being understand everything what they were saying. But that was prior to this. I worked in a nursing home, and not being speaking much of language at that time at all, I realized years later that I was very attuned with signals from my patients, from people I was cared for, which were not logical and not vocal, not oral, not words. So I was paying attention to signals which were nonverbal. And that in the later years of addressing needs of my patients became a very valuable source of information. So that life had it that I ended up working in capacity in Canada. I was rehab assistant because I had no language, therefore I couldn't defend my degree in Canada. I ended up working as rehab assistant. But that gave me a lot of time with patients, which therapists over years didn't have. So I did my assigned duties with my patients as to exercises and such, but I also had time to talk to people and listen to them. And that turned out to be a source of immense value, because here I had a chance to listen to people emotional states. So over years, gradually, it progressed from looking after people physicality as to strength of their muscles, ability to move their limbs and be able to move physically. And then as I listened to people, I started recognizing that my patients have thoughts, emotional states, and they are affecting the body, the function, and the healing process. And naturally, it seemed, I don't know, life, natural progression. I started being introduced to patients who were facing the immortality, either by sudden shifts in life. So let's say someone was in a car accident or had heart attack or had stroke, which was sudden shifts in life. And they were going through traumas of all different kinds within. And I started recognizing that unless someone is totally paralyzed, we are not addressing people's emotional states and what they're experiencing within. So given that I had a lot of time to sit and spend time with patients, or I crafted it in such a way that I was very efficient when it came to the physical activities, and then I intentionally cut out time to spend time with people. But in the process, I also started recognizing that interaction with patients and that every moment had profound influence on them, and hence why humor started showing up gradually. But as I mentioned, throughout the whole process, I also started being attending to people. And one would think, how in the world were you attending to people at the end of life when you were in rehab? But many of my patients were deemed palliative in the course of their journey. Not everybody healed, and many of them faced their immortality. Hence why spirituality and this whole question, end of life, as to who I am and what life is about, all of this started surfacing.
Fascinating. And that's, I mean, I think it's very, it's a beautiful story, and certainly one I think that gives us pause to sort of reflect in terms of, you know, how a person, as you've described, right, who is, you know, attuned to caring for the body, goes through a journey of you know, caring for the heart and soul, and the mind, and all of that as well. A different kind of physical therapy, I guess, but
Yes.
equally connected. So. I'm certainly struck by, the conversations I've heard you mention before, about the need for more training in the area of spiritual care and healthcare. I think that you've described that as I guess, an awakening through your own experience. Could you maybe sort of expand on that a little bit more as well?
Very much so. The healthcare system, especially hospitals, we are tending to human physicality. We are mending human body. And there is a illness process. We are attending to this, but from my experience, we are attending to human physical symptoms. Hence, why this need to recognize people emotions, and not just the emotions of the ones who are in our care, but the very emotions of those who are attending to the ones who are in our care. So our caregivers' emotions, what we're bringing to the presence of others, because all of this is absolutely intricate. But the question, why spirituality? Our five senses are giving us experience of identity that we are the body and we are the thoughts. And in recent experiences with the pandemic, global pandemic, we globally face the fear of death. Because the fear which we had was basically, if you really think about what was the fear, it was every fear is indirectly and then directly leading to the fear of death. And with that, we started asking ourselves all kind of questions, hopefully we did, as to who we are. At the end of life, when a person is facing their own mortality, the human mind has no capacity to grasp its own mortality. And that's why this is such an amazing space for us to experience something which is beyond our typical five sensory experiences and identity, that we are the mind and we are the thoughts. And when I was addressing my patient's thoughts, frankly, yesterday, I was talking to someone who is suicidal for 25 years. And I managed to have a moment with the person when the person smiled a few times. That, to me, is achieving something profound. So all kind of methods, especially in the form of trying to address the chemical balances in the mind, were already introduced over the years, and nothing is working. But when you really listen to the person, she will say, I have these thoughts. I have these thoughts. So my question to her was, if you have these thoughts, that means you are not the thoughts, because there's something in you that is having these thoughts, like you having this shirt on, like you having a great meal. That means that's not your identity, who you are. And the person actually asked me at some point, so who am I? And I said, that's an amazing question that most of us don't ask. At the end of life, when I was attending to my patients, but also in my personal experiences when someone was dying in my life, when my brain, therefore my patient's brain or those who are in the presence of death, when we are unable to make logical sense because our mind's capacities are not adept to grasp mortality, its own mortality, we start experiencing states which are way beyond logic. Suddenly people see how things are synchronized, how the right people show up at the right time, how certain words are being spoken. Life is intricate and flowy because we cannot control death. It is one of the frontiers, if you will, for lack of better words, the place, the space where life is bigger than our logical minds. And when we come to that space, if we do, with openness, rather than being fully, because most of us are very overtaken by grieving emotions, heavy human emotions of loss. When we have a little bit openness and we come with openness to the presence of death, we are, for lack of better words, graced or have part in experiences which are beyond logic. And let's make no mistakes, there are countless researches being done throughout the world where people testify to these experiences globally, regardless of the religion, background, belief systems. They do experience something like which is beyond the norm five senses, but we don't share these experiences and we don't talk about it out of fear of ridicule. Because it is so logical that if we introduce it to someone who is operating on the logical level, we being deemed weird.
Mm-hmm.
But my patients, when I came to their presence with openness, it's almost as if they had a sixth sense, or there was communication where they would give me a tiny statement, and it was an invitation to which I was attuned and I followed. And they would testify to experiencing the existence, even when the body was deemed dying, or the existence was coming to its end as we know it, meaning physicality and the brain processes were coming to its end.
Wow. So there's a lot of profound sort of experiences in what you're sharing, and I think we're going to get into more of it as we continue the conversation here. I guess, I mean, it may beg the question, but why do we need to bring more of this back into, I guess, our practice of as healthcare professionals?
It starts with, because we were talking about why the training in spiritual care, when it is a very undefinable field, if you will. It is not the measurable, as we know everything else in healthcare system being done, field or part of. And the reason we need to do it, because if we plant these seeds and people come across experiences like this, it is not going to derail them. It will prepare them in a sense. Nurses, doctors, I could give you names of published authors, highly renowned professionals with medical knowledge, experts who themselves experienced situations when they were facing their own mortality or were in comas, and they returned to life, heal in miraculous way, as we would call it. Mm-hmm. Because our medical knowledge is not allowing us to explain and intellectualize and tell us what happened there yet. And they testifying to their own existence when the medical world, when we on this side, for lack of better words, are deeming them being dead or gone or irreversibly damaged psychologically or brain functions or body. People do resume life. And I have to tell you, I witness and I've been part of instantaneous remissions when the physicians are running CT scans and trying to determine why such a outcome came instantaneously, healing outcome, if you will, and they have no way of explaining what happened. One story that comes to mind is a patient of mine had stroke during heart surgery and had totally flaccid one side of his body. And as a physiotherapy rehab person, I was coming and I was touching my patient's body. So I was moving his leg, and I became so attuned with my patients that I could feel there were trickles of electric signals going to his foot. And I said to him that I can sense that the connection, the neurological connection and the signals are still coming to his foot. I can feel it, I can sense it. And so it was, I said to him, I'm promising nothing, although I've seen here remarkable things happening in the course of my work with people. And the next day, when I was doing exercises with his leg, he was a pastor, and his wife was sitting next to him. So there was additional witness. It's not just my story or the patient's story. And he said to me, there was a bolt of energy going up my spine. And we were all shocked by his statement. The next thing you know, he lifted his hand, he touched his head, and he said to his wife who was sitting to his left, honey, now my head hurts. And she said, honey, you are holding your head with your paralyzed arm. He was able, this from a physiotherapy point of view should take years to accomplish. And this man did it instantaneously. So what's at work? These situations do take place in the healthcare system. And we are not talking about it openly because we don't have the means to explain why is it working for one person and is it possible to make it available to others. And yet something is at work and we are dismissing it for whatever reason because it's unknown, and we naming it in whichever we want to, but it is taking place. And I've seen it more than once in my practice in physiotherapy and service to patients.
So For some of our listeners, who maybe have, different faiths, maybe even atheists or agnostics or whatever it may be, how would you distinguish what you're describing in terms of the spiritual care from, what others might describe as faith-based care?
Mm. Faith-based care is based on a belief system which was introduced to us from through the word or testimonies of others. Care of the spirit and spiritual state is something that we experience. It's something that maybe teaching of others were pointing us to, which most religions do. They point us to something that is at work in our lives, which is beyond the physicality and the function of the brain. But unless we experience it, we question it, right? So spirituality is like a sea in which individual religion is floating. How do I say it? It's universal. It's a language of every human being. Hence why joy is so powerful and works regardless of the background, cultural background or religious background, or maybe there is no background. Some people are not believing in no system and no God, but yet it's still at work. Because when you think of it, every human body is animated by force, which is animating the body, obviously. Everyone has heart, which is pumping. Every human being has thoughts and emotions. Every human being is looking for happiness. Every human being responds to the language of compassion, regardless if they have indigenous background and belief systems and practices, or Roman Catholic or Protestant, or they Buddhist. We all respond to the same. Hence why joy is so powerful, and humor, because it's a universal language that every human understands. What humor does, it questions the adopted to and believed into realities and belief systems in a non-offensive way. It bypasses the belief system, the set rules, the set belief systems. It brings yet another perspective and creates psychological distance to the heaviness of the situation. Humor is so powerful. I am shocked that it's not being taught in medical trainings. Frankly, in trainings about communication, because every human being gets the humor. And when I teach and I present on humor and the power of joy and humor, I talk about that one which is not offensive, and it's not demeaning. It's not at expense of other. It's the one which is truly universal and works for all of us. And we all have access to it, but no one pointed out to us. It's this, I'm shocked as to how simple in a sense it is and how overlooked it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to, I guess, assume or, conjecture that as healthcare professionals are being trained, right, they're being taught a certain professional code, right, and that, healthcare is a serious business. And as such, in the execution of their roles, right, there is no place for humor per se, right? It's a scientific method, and so, I mean, how do you, even given your own professional background and trainings, how do you reconcile those two things together?
How we deliver the care to our patients from our seriousness and almost with element of fear and sense of heavy feel of responsibilities for saving someone's life and affecting another's life. The patients, on the other hand, are testifying to how our states, our psychological thought processes, and our very way of being with them affects them. So if you ask patients, they will tell you that those who come with heaviness, seriousness, And I'm far from saying there's no time and space for this. No one is laughing hysterically when someone is in a state of experiencing profound pain.
Mm-hmm.
No one is, being a jokester or a comedian at the bedside of a patient. But the patients themselves will tell you if the person who comes into their presence affects them positively or negatively, based on the caregiver's emotional states, intentions, and their own very state of being. So those who come with lightheartedness, with openness, with compassion, which is not a heavy emotion, but it's true love and care for another, which the intention of compassion is minimize the suffering of the one in front. When that very state of the caregiver is present, that itself affects the patient and the energy level and the mood, and therefore the willingness and ability to address or deal with what they have. And I have to tell you, there is a story that comes to mind. A patient came to a hospital with a problem, and it was addressed through surgery, but yet the patient has full package of emotional things to deal with. And to bring a little bit of a joy brings normality, brings hope for change, brings energy of life, brings a ray of light, lightness, hope. And that can be introduced to the very last moment. And the reason why we need to teach about it is because we're talking about client-centered care, but we're looking more at the screens and the records we need to write and the legality behind looking after people, but we're not really attuned with what's going on with the patient and around the patient. In order to bring humor and moments of joy in heavily emotionally charged situations, when someone is gravely ill, one needs to be so aware to one's own state and the dynamics which are unfolding in front of them. That is being truly client patient-centered care. You know, I work recently with patients who are in advanced states of dementia. And they, within minutes, from incoherent sounds, form individual words, and then make whole statements, full logical sentence, sometimes within minutes. My experiences, as of recent, working with people with advanced states of dementia, that they have awareness, not just to us, but also to themselves. I am yet to write another book about how we training healthcare providers by giving them stories and situations and asking them to commend it to their memory. And then in the presence of being in the presence of patients with dementia, we expect the caregiver to run through the records of these memories, of these stories, in order to find the real response to what's unfolding in front of us. That takes way too long, because you need to be so attuned with the person in front of you and respond to their emotional language, even if it is not a language of logic, because it's not a language of logic. Just yesterday, when I was leaving work, where I address needs of these people, the CEO was actually in the lobby with one of the residents who was waiting for a transfer to pick the person up, and said to me, "Help me." And I faced the person, and we had conversation without logical words. And she witnessed this, that I was responding to what was in front of us, what the person was expressing without words. But we are not giving healthcare providers tools which they can use not only in connecting with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, but those tools are skills which they can take to everyday life whenever they go to communicate.
Yes, so some of what you've been describing, for me to relate it back to my own, I guess, work and experiences, I mean, we talk about we do a lot of education on leadership, and as such, we talk about qualities that leaders need to possess, and we talk about compassion, humility, and when you talk about a person approaching bedside, with a lightheartedness and the ability to experience what's happening in front of them, just by your last story. It seems that they're demonstrating a kind of humility or humanity in themselves by being vulnerable, by being, I think you used the word normal, but just being authentic, and that creates a space of, in our leadership practices, creates psychological safety. But right, but in the experience of being bedside, it's creating a safety. For the patient, resident, client, whoever is sort of experiencing that. Would that be fair, I guess, in terms of what?
Yes. What communication with humor brings to the table is it's meeting of two equals. That's what true compassion is. I am not coming to you because I have knowledge and you are in a weakened position and you have nothing to offer. Therefore, I'm coming to you and I am fixing you and I am telling you which way to go. It's a dance of two and it's exchange. We are all teachers and students of each other. A lot what I'm telling you is from experience which my patients allowed me to enter. They allowed me into the inner worlds and they shared that with me because they saw that I didn't come from a position of power over and knowing it all. I came there with genuine interest to learn from them about what they experiencing at this state of their journey. And what came from them was so rich and that no book and study could prepare me for, because it was the genuine connection between two human beings. And when there is such an exchange, we indirectly valuing another person, we are empowering them, we are showing them value. One of my favorite words to my patients were, "Thank you. You taught me something new I never thought about."
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about compassion, for humor to be present, the kind of humor I'm teaching about, that's a bridge between two human beings.
So I think you started to touch on this a little bit, but I mean, it's become a lot more prevalent, I guess, in healthcare over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. Where many healthcare providers are having to be, bedside, right, for, an end of life experience with somebody that wasn't prepared for. Obviously those that are in a hospice or a palliative care environment, that's the journey that they're spending. But we have a lot more people in long-term care, which have been having these experiences, and I think we've heard, right, many of them are not prepared for what they're experiencing, right, and that has been created a moral distress for some of them in terms of that. And yet you describe your own experience. I appreciate it's been organic, but you've discovered joy in that,
Yes.
in those experiences. So thinking about those that haven't been able to find joy in those experiences yet, or have been troubled by it, quite frankly, how do you relate, like maybe step in them with your logical experience, or I know it's an emotional part too, but where's the joy in being bedside with somebody who is dying?
Where is the joy? Joy is a state of being. We humans, we actually deep inside having states of beings, like a clear sky. States of beings are always there. Everything else is clouds which are passing, thunderstorms, and these are our thoughts. If we really start speaking about how do you address passing of another, well, the journey starts inside of the healthcare provider, and that is starts becoming one of the things I ask people is, pay attention to how your thoughts trigger different emotional states within you. For example, let's say I have teenager children and they are flirting with drugs. The moment I start thinking about them and their life going into down spiral, probably causing their death, I am in a space of fear, desperation, and worry.
Mm-hmm.
And that will bring emotional reaction. This very thought, the projection into the future as to how that life will unfold in the future, will cause me certain emotional state. And if I shift my thoughts into hope that not everyone who is flirting with drugs in teenager years end up being drug addict and it cost them life, then I'm shifting my thoughts into state of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And with that thought, what follows is different emotional reaction within me. But there is someone within each one of us which is observing, capable of observing these fleeting thoughts, therefore fleeting emotional states. Deep inside, the state of being of every human being is peace, joy, and love. But because we are constantly being played by our thought processes and projections to the future or remembering the past, we are being played by our thought processes emotionally. So healthcare providers carry this responsibility of being responsible for the life staying or life leaving. You know, recently I talked to the nurses that I am surrounded by because there were quite few departures, meaning few people passed on within 1 week on one unit. And the nurses who are naturally trained to save people's lives and make the journey as easy as possible, painless and such, are overwhelmed by this departure.
Yeah, exactly.
It usually comes in waves too. It's usually more than one person at the time. And I just made one statement which acquainted them from the responsibility for every life. I said to them, but there is actually a contract, that's how I phrased it, between the life, every spirit, every soul, and the creator. There is actually a choice is given, free will to every life. This is not fully up to us to decide that life is leaving or is staying. Why is it that people against all odds are hanging on to life and waiting for someone to show up at their bedside at the end in order to say goodbye, and only they let go? Against all predictions of our knowledge, based on our knowledge and predictions, that how the physical system works, this person shouldn't be living as far as we're concerned. But yet life prevails because that life within has a choice, which we forget about. Therefore, the burden of the life partying or staying, it's on us. We take it as of our responsibility only. What else is underlying in all of this is fear. Fear that what happens to, let's say, if someone believes that life is existing beyond physicality and mental processes, that life is now subjected to something horrific. We are fearful for those who are passing, unless we had experiences which were beyond five sensory, which were positive, and many caregivers do. Like I talk to caregivers, and they tell me all kind of things. They convey and share with me things which they usually don't talk to anybody about. And why don't they? Out of fear of ridicule. We also take it heavily because our own experience of life is physicality, and our identity is, if this ends, then everything ends. And that's why we take it so heavily. Because when you think of it, if you had experienced that life exists beyond the physical and the mental process, if you were at the bedside of someone who is dying and had experienced that life continues, and I had experience, not just thought or belief system, but how acquainted you would be from the heaviness that life ends with the physical death. Just a few weeks ago, a resident I was attending to suddenly the experience, the illness took over in rapid pace, and the person was unable to swallow and stopped eating.
Mm-hmm.
And as a spiritual care provider, I went to the bedside of that patient, and we were talking about death, and we were talking about that person's fear of dying. And I shared with the person very personal experiences of states being beyond the physicality. And this is what the patient said to me. You touched my heart. And now I remember, after my mother died, she came to me. And I realized later that my role was not to as much to share my personal experience, but to recall for that person, help the person to recall that experience when he lost his mother, and he had that experience which was beyond five senses. And that eased off his departure. Because it was based on his experience, not on me telling and sharing my stories, but sharing my stories was the bridge to his experience. And once he recalled that experience, his fear was lessened. And then he passed on 2 days later.
Very beautiful. So maybe building on that, Zofia, I mean, you talked about how you then share your experiences and how that's impacted on, that that client's experience in that moment. Can we expand that, I guess, maybe to talk about then, because you've mentioned it throughout, but the role of humor, and how do you use humor then, more broadly, through these difficult sort of parts? Like, where does it fit in?
I don't plan. The humor shows up, if you will.
Okay.
Here's an example. Recently, a loved one was passing on, and family members were gathered around, and I had a challenge with finding in a timely manner a priest who would come and give the sacrament of the sick, the last blessing, because the person was Christian, Roman Catholic. And finally, I located the priest who would come within 15 minutes. And when I came to the family bedside, I said to them, because I actually did. When the priest agreed, I said to him, I love you, because I was so grateful. I said, I love you. And then when I came to the family, I said, this is first time ever in my life I told the priest I love him. And then I told them that the outcome is such that the priest is coming. And everybody laughed. Everybody laughed in this room as the person was in the bed and actively passing. This is what I mean about humor showing up. Sometimes it was intentional, truly was intentional. Not treating people and the place as if it is only grim and heavy. On intensive care unit years ago, there was a patient who was on life support, but I knew that he was aware, because that awareness never goes away, actually. Hence why the connection with people with dementia. And family members were sitting by the bedside of this person because the doctors concluded that this life is coming to its end. And I walked into the room because I had already rapport created with the patient. Every time I finished exercises, I would put my small finger around his, even when he was not responding. And I would say to him, pinky hug, Fred, pinky hug. One day when I was leaving that room and I didn't do the pinky hug, I looked over my shoulder and he lifted the finger, not the middle one, the pinky one. And I knew that he was kind of telling me, hey, girl, you forgot the pinky hug. So I went and I gave him the pinky hug. And so I knew that he was all along very aware what I was doing with him, that I was greeting him, saying goodbye a certain way. So one day when I walked into his room, family members were sitting there and he was deemed to be gone. And I knew, because, how do I put it? In my presentations and my training, I show people how they need to shift into intuitive abilities. Even Einstein was saying that we created society based on logical mind, and we totally disregarding our sacred gift, our intuitive mind. So I walked into the room knowing the man already, seeing the family being sitting there in desperation and in sorrow and grieving, frankly. But I sensed that he is aware, and to some degree, he's not giving them signals intentionally. So I called on his name and I said, do you know they're sitting by your side for an hour and a half already? For goodness sake, give them some sign. At least open your eyes and wink at them. And would you believe he opened his eyes and he winked? A week later, he passed on. Would you think that the family maybe has amazing memory from that bedside of the loved one dying, and it's not just associated with heavy, grim emotions, but moment of playfulness and joy, which is always present and always able to or ready to be accessed.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not obviously turning a situation into a knock joke, but it's it's maybe in more poetic language, it's opening, right, the drapes, letting the light in, putting in some flowers, right, creating a space which has some integral beauty to it, as opposed to closing the curtains, turning off the lights, and playing funeral music, right, which makes everybody feel differently.
And the most powerful element in it is the patient is participating in it. The patient needs to play active role, but not necessary. If the patient was lighthearted person and enjoyed humor throughout their life, and if I connected with that person prior to them being in the final stages of life, and I'll bring these stories of my connecting with that person with joy and humor prior to them reaching final stage of life, the family also appreciates this. Because when you think of it, what all we want for those we love? We want them to be happy. So if those who are in our care have a moment of being happy, even when they're struggling, isn't that amazing gift to those who are staying behind? To know that someone who is on the Alzheimer unit with advanced dementia is having moments of joy and laughter. Right now we have someone who is working there in the person who does activities brings so much joy. It affects not just the residents, it affects everybody who works there. And the residents who are in advanced states of dementia respond to it. People feel the energy and the emotional states of those around them. Those with states with advanced dementia and Alzheimer's, they know, they sense it. If you come there with joy, they open their eyes. They maybe will not speak to you, but they will respond to the energy level, to the emotional lightness that you bring to their presence. That's what music does. They will not be able to have meaningful conversations with you, but they will touch their hearts. And some of them will say, it's good, and they will touch their hearts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess what it reminds me of, I guess, in some ways, again, helping me to sort of understand it. We're creating feelings, I guess, that I would associate with home, right, or family, or right, things that and I understand why people want to die in their own homes, right, because it is a place of safety, it's a place of joy, it's memories, and to some degree, through the experiences that you're helping, to create in a institutional environment, are giving them some of that same sort of humanity.
If I come from a place of I am equal human being, I'm here to serve in my best capacity. It's not up to me to determine if you're going or you're not. I am connected to a life source which throbs in my heart and makes my breath possible. I am just a part of something which is much greater. I am not, as an individual in this whole big life, responsible for your life. I am just element in it. And what I found that when I was coming from that place, when I was connected to my God, to my spirit and the spirit of all creation, however you call it, then I was coming with not as such a big burden. Neither did I have to describe and determine that life needs to go or stay. It was not on me. There are greater forces which are working. And in my personal journey, going back full circle to my personal journey, it was in a time of my life when majority of my identity was lost. When I came to Canada, suddenly I was not a therapist. I couldn't speak the language. I didn't have relations with people. I didn't know the culture, how it operates. I didn't know which way to go. When I asked for assistance of something what was much greater, that assistance was coming and showing up through people, through circumstances. Hence why, how quickly I end up in the hospital. There were another crisis, for lack of better words, in my life when I also went on my knees, literally and otherwise, and I asked of assistance of something greater, and the right circumstances started unfolding. And we, in our thought processes, we seem to be just relying on ourselves, where life is much greater than that. And it is the spirit of life, as I would call it, is for us, for all of us. It doesn't make distinctions as to how what kind of color skin you have, how educated you are, what kind of titles you have, what kind of positions you hold. It is accessible to all of us. Hence why we need to return to that connection, because on our own we are to some degree lost. But when we see that there are forces in our life which are operating beyond our limited awareness, knowledge, then we are walking in a humble space and we are equal with each other.
So, I mean, you've had a few decades of experience in this space, Sophia. And I think if you're describing you're bringing together different cases or stories in perhaps another forthcoming book. But what would be your, I guess, inspiration? I mean, like, what have you drawn from all of these different experiences? I guess that might, that you could say that you've learned about healthcare or even more about humanity as a result of this.
That we are all alike within. In my presentations and my keynotes, I ask the audience members to have a very short interactive moments when they experience it. And they're shocked because they're sitting by random people, you would think, but they find connections, which is mind-boggling. And so we are all alike. Inside, every human being is longing for the same. Every human being is longing for love. Every human being knows when it's respected. Every human being knows when it's appreciated. Every human being knows that it's respected just by us being curious and wanting to learn from them. They are being validated. This language is universal. And the language of joy is equally universal because every human being is looking for happiness. Every human being understands when humor is introduced and experientially that there is psychological distance to interpretation and heaviness of the situation. It can be done with everybody. I was shocked that my presentations given to palliative care providers shifted in no time to the world of business. And I found myself standing in front of large audiences speaking about my experiences and the language of humor and joy to leaders in the business. It was fascinating to me that this language that I'm talking about is universal and crosses various disciplines, if you will, in where humans operate.
So, speaking of leaders in that space, then, I mean, what would be your advice to them in terms of what they can perhaps do differently themselves in terms of their roles within healthcare organizations, and thinking even more specifically outside of those that have roles in hospice or palliative care? What is maybe the lessons that other parts of the health system can take from those two sectors that you've been working in?
We need to start operating and giving people permission to work and be in the presence of another and serve from a place of compassion and love versus fear and control. because that's what part of our minds wants to do. We want to control life. We want to be certain, but there's element to life, call it spiritual, however you will want to address it, which is in flow, which is out of our grasp, which we cannot fully, we don't know it all. And I'm not even sure that we can fully control it. There has to be element of unknown, which we can step into wholeheartedly and trust life processes. We can't be rigid and knowing it all. We have to admit that we do not know it all. And quite often those who are at the end of life are our teachers. It's fascinating to me that in the culture that I stepped into and started living, how we are constantly focused on prolonging life and youthfulness, and how much time we spend on our physicality, and we are not going deeper into what it is a privilege to be alive, to be a human being. We became, the conference where we met, the theme was caring, doing, and being. And I felt it's the being that we are disconnected from. We are disconnected from our state of being, from inner peace. The observer in us, which observes these ever fluctuating thoughts, it's the one who is actually the true identity. It is sitting there throughout our lives. It's always there, regardless. And somehow we come attuned with that state of being, and we need to go there inside. The journey is inside. And once we journey inside, then we bring it to the presence of others without proclaiming, screaming, or telling others what to. People sense it, and indirectly they're given permission to be themselves and be okay with not being perfect and knowing it all.
Yeah, well, it's true of many leaders and other professionals is, the focus on doing and outcomes and achievements, right? But it is that self-reflection as a leader about learning yourself, your biases, your fears, right,
Yes.
who you are. That is the hardest, but in many respects, I think probably the most rewarding, and a good place to begin. So maybe moving from there, Zofia, I know we're getting close to time here as well, and I want to respect that. So any, final words to you, and I know how much you're very passionate about this and giving the gift of your experiences to others and helping to share and to help others to learn from what you've experienced. So so any final words to you, and maybe sort of to let people know how they can engage with you if they would like to learn more.
I am at the same time, simultaneously as I am on the front line, I am also speaking and presenting and offering workshops. Actually, a few are booked already, including keynotes. So if someone is interested in me coming to the organization or a conference or a group gathering, team building, because once we discover and equipped individually, it affects the dynamics of the cultures of the environments in which we are. So I am inviting people to reach out to me if they're interested. I'll be more than happy. There's way more to humor than meets the ear, as I like to say. Just yesterday, I heard a very renowned psychologists talking about research done on how humor affects the dynamics in marriages, in relationships, how it's a powerful tool to enliven and bring the relationships to exuberance and different space. And I experience it in my personal life. I experience it in my work, and I am this offering is in making over 30 years internationally. I work with people here in Manitoba from all different walks of lives, different religions, different ages. I know it's universal language. I know how to equip people, and with my recent experience with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, even more so, because I was given the training which is not equipping me the way that I believe people should be. There are ways of us individually engaging in our personal lives in ways which will transfer into the places where we work, where we live. There are tools so that we all can engage in to access that what I'm talking about. And it is a very freeing experience. Life becomes lighter. Life becomes synchronistic. Life becomes rich and majestic and magical, for lack of better words. There's a flow to life which we are disconnected from. And that flow also happens in the hospital settings, at the bedside of dying patients. It actually does. And maybe because the logical mind cannot grasp mortality, it is so pronounced there. If we only open ourselves to it, rather than being overwhelmed by and blocked by our own perceptions and ideas and belief systems as to what life and death is, because that's what it all comes to. At the end, people who come to my workshops and presentations, they're being equipped to live life differently.
Well, it's some very insightful sort of last words for yourself and hopeful, which I think, as we started the conversation, I wanted to provide hope to our listeners and to, so many healthcare workers who are searching for that, I think, in new ways. So thank you for sharing all of that. And perhaps you can share as well, some of the ways that people can contact you or resources. We'll add them in our show notes for our listeners, and then they can connect with you that way as well. So thank you again, Zofia, for a really beautiful, heart-moving conversation. I feel lighter and more open today than I was when we started. So thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate this and for giving me an opportunity to share about my passion, my work, and hopefully we will bring it to more people to empower them to shift their lives and so they can enjoy it.
Thank you. You take care.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the HQ, and I'm Dale Sherbeck, your host. You can find this and other future episodes on the CHA Learning website, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. We'd love to hear what you think, so please follow us on our other social media channels. Thanks for joining us in this discussion today. Please join us next time.